It was New Year's Eve, and I was out celebrating with my friends at a local bar. We were all having a great time, laughing and drinking and counting down the minutes until midnight. But as the clock struck 12, things took a sudden and terrifying turn. I was chatting with one of my friends when I saw a group of shady-looking men walk in. They had the look of criminals about them, and I immediately felt uneasy. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. But as the night went on, the men started to make their rounds. They were talking to people, whispering in their ears and slipping something into their hands. It was clear that they were up to no good. I tried to stay as far away from them as possible, but eventually one of them approached me. He leaned in close and whispered, "You want to make some easy money? We have a little job for you." I knew I should have said no, but I was feeling reckless and greedy. I agreed to do whatever they asked, and they handed me a bag full of drugs. I spent the rest of the night delivering the drugs to various people around the city. It was a dangerous and illegal activity, and I knew I could get caught at any moment. But I was too caught up in the thrill of it all to care. As the night wore on, I started to feel more and more uneasy. The men I was working for seemed to be getting more and more aggressive, and I was starting to fear for my life. Finally, as the sun was starting to rise on the new year, I decided I had had enough. I gathered up my courage and told the men I was done. But they weren't about to let me go that easily. They grabbed me by the arm and told me I was in too deep to back out now. They threatened to turn me into the police if I didn't continue working for them. I knew I had no choice but to keep going. I spent the next year running from the law, always looking over my shoulder and fearing for my life. It was a terrifying and dangerous way to start the new year, and one that I will never forget. As the months passed, I became more and more entrenched in the criminal world. I was constantly running drugs and committing other illegal acts, all to keep the men I was working for happy. But as the year went on, I started to realize that I couldn't keep living like this. The constant fear and anxiety were taking a toll on me, and I knew I had to find a way out. I started to hatch a plan to escape and turn myself into the authorities. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was desperate to get my life back on track. One night, as I was making a delivery, I saw my chance. I managed to slip away from the men I was working for and make a run for it. I didn't stop until I was safely at the police station, where I turned myself in and begged for help. To my surprise, the police were sympathetic to my situation. They understood that I had been forced into a life of crime, and they promised to help me get out of it. With their help, I was able to testify against the men who had been forcing me to run drugs. It was a risky move, but I knew it was the only way I could truly be free. In the end, my bravery paid off. The men were arrested and charged with numerous crimes, and I was able to start over. It wasn't easy, and there were definitely some bumps in the road, but I was finally able to leave my criminal past behind and start a new, honest life. Looking back on that New Year's Eve, I can't believe how far I've come. It was a scary and dangerous way to start the year, but it was also the turning point in my life. It showed me that no matter how low you may feel, there is always a way out and a chance for redemption. It was New Year's Eve, and my friends and I had decided to go out and celebrate. We ended up at a party at a friend's house, drinking and having a good time. As the night went on, things started to get a little rowdy. At around midnight, one of my friends, Jerry, suggested we go out and do some fun stuff. I had a bad feeling about it, but I went along with it. We ended up breaking into a convenience store and stealing some cigarettes and beer. As we were leaving, the alarm went off and we panicked. Jerry grabbed me and pulled me out the door, but I could see the fear in his eyes. We ran as fast as we could, trying to get away. We eventually made it back to the party, panting and out of breath. Jerry and I went into the bathroom to catch our breath, and he turned to me with a wild look in his eyes. "We have to get out of here," he said. "They're going to catch us and we'll go to jail." I didn't know what to do. I was terrified and my head was spinning. we decided to leave the party and try to come up with a plan. As we walked through the streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. We ended up at a deserted alleyway, trying to figure out our next move. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind us and turned to see a group of men approaching. They were all wearing masks and carrying weapons. Jerry and I tried to run, but they were too fast. They grabbed us and dragged us into a van, throwing us into the back. As the van drove off, I realized that these men were not just criminals, but members of a notorious gang. We were taken to a warehouse where we were beaten and interrogated. They wanted to know who we were and what we were doing at the convenience store. I was terrified and begged for mercy, but they just laughed. As the hours ticked by, I started to lose hope. I thought that this was it, that I was going to die in this warehouse on New Year's Day. But then, just as I was about to give up, I heard the sound of sirens approaching. The police burst into the warehouse and arrested the gang members, rescuing Jerry and I. As I was being taken to the hospital, I couldn't help but think about how close I had come to death. That New Year's Eve was the scariest night of my life, and I vowed to never make the same mistakes again. I learned the hard way that crime does not pay, and that it's always better to do the right thing. After I was released from the hospital, I had to face the consequences of my actions. Jerry and I were charged with breaking and entering, as well as theft. It was a harsh lesson, but one that I will never forget. I ended up serving time in jail, but it was nothing compared to the fear and terror I experienced that night. I spent my time in jail reflecting on my mistakes and working to better myself. When I was released, I dedicated myself to turning my life around. I went back to school and got a degree in criminal justice, determined to use my experiences to help others avoid making the same mistakes I did. Now, every New Year's Eve, I reflect on that terrifying night and the lessons it taught me. I am grateful to be alive and to have the opportunity to make a positive difference in the world. I still celebrate the holiday, but now I do so in a responsible and respectful manner. I have learned that the true meaning of New Year's Eve is not about partying and reckless behavior, but about starting fresh and making the most of the year ahead. It was New Year's Eve, and I was out celebrating with my friends. We had rented a cabin in the woods for the weekend, and were having a blast party and ringing in the new year. But little did we know, our celebration was about to take a turn for the worst. As the clock struck midnight, and the fireworks lit up the sky, we heard a knock on the door. Thinking it was just some friendly partygoers, we opened it without hesitation. But instead of happy revelers, we were faced with a group of masked men armed with guns. They pushed their way into the cabin and demanded that we hand over all of our valuables. My friends and I were terrified and immediately complied, handing over our wallets and phones. But the men didn't stop there. They searched the cabin, looking for anything else of value. And when they couldn't find anything else, they turned to us and said they would take us as hostages instead. My heart was pounding in my chest as they bound our hands and forced us into their van. We were driven to a remote location where we were thrown into a dark, damp cell. We had no idea what was going on or what these men wanted from us. All we knew was that we were in serious trouble. Days passed and we were given nothing but bread and water to eat. We were too scared to even speak to each other, afraid of what would happen if we made a noise. Finally, on the third day, we were brought out of our cell and into a room with a table and chairs. The men sat us down and explained that they were part of a criminal organization and were using us as leverage to get what they wanted from our families. We were terrified and begged for them to let us go, but they just laughed and told us that we were never getting out alive. That's when I knew we were in for a long, terrifying night. As the hours ticked by, I couldn't help but think about my family and friends, wondering if they were frantically searching for us and if we would ever see them again. The thought of never getting to see them again was too much to bear. But as the night went on, I started to hear strange noises coming from outside the room. It sounded like someone was trying to break in. And then, suddenly, the door burst open and a group of police officers stormed in, guns drawn. We were saved. The criminal organization had been caught and we were finally free. As we were escorted out of the building and reunited with our loved ones, I couldn't help but feel grateful to be alive. But the memory of that terrifying New Year's Eve will stay with me forever. I'll never forget the fear and desperation I felt in that dark cell, wondering if I would ever see the light of day again. As we left the cabin in the woods and headed back home, my friends and I couldn't stop shaking. The thought of what could have happened if we weren't rescued still lingered in our minds. We were all grateful to be alive, but the experience left us shaken and traumatized. We decided to cut our trip short and go home, not wanting to spend another moment in that place. On the drive back, we couldn't help but wonder how we had gotten mixed up in such a dangerous situation. We were just trying to have a fun New Year's Eve celebration, but it had turned into a nightmare. When we arrived home, we were greeted with hugs and tears from our relieved families. They had been searching for us nonstop and were overjoyed to see us safe and sound. After everything we had been through, we were all in need of some rest and relaxation. We spent the next few days recovering and trying to come to terms with what had happened. But even though we were safe and sound, the memory of that scary New Year's Eve will stay with us forever. It was a reminder that danger can lurk anywhere, even in the most unexpected places. And it was a lesson to always be cautious and aware of our surroundings, no matter where we are.